coming to you with the explanation of the Whirlwind Earthquake Barbarian build, my takes on the build, the legendary aspects that I chose, quick overview of the Paragon board, and then some generic advice as well as some offshoots that I took from the what would be considered to be the normal build. Uh, just to note, I didn't feel any need to comment on the leveling process. That is very straightforward. If you need leveling advice, yes, please comment on the video and let me know. There are some tactics you can use to make uh, leveling very, very easy. Obviously, the first and easiest one is what anyone would generically call twink leveling. That is, once you have your main character, you just do your whisper missions and you collect about 2 tabs worth of these uh, these gear boxes or ancestral caches or legendary caches, what have you, from the tree. You start your new character and then you open all of them at once and you get an explosion of EXP. That being said, let's jump into the build. So in the last video, you would have seen that we did drop a couple mythics. We got unlucky on the rerolls, but we did end up with an Air of Perdition. You can see that my sanctification on the Air of Perdition ended on quality, hence the 45 quality there. Um, Pretty much we just got unlucky with this. I would have loved a better effects to do with earthquakes or to do with crit or whatever. But this is still a very good helmet, and honestly, we can't really complain about the stats. We did get +4 to core skills. Obviously, this particular helmet is not BIS in terms of its current roles, but it is best in slot to have the Air Perdition. Before this, you would generically have your legendary helmet being the Ugly Bastard helm. Obviously, if and when you drop an Ugly Bastard helm, I would say start using it immediately, even if it's very low level, and only de-equip it once you have a upgrade. This is just a very good helmet. The unique doesn't really help you in this build because you don't currently use Wrath of Berserker, at least not in this build, in my version. There are push versions which do use Wrath of the Berserker and actually make use of Ground Stomp in of itself, but we won't touch on those. For the chest, Mantled Mountain's Fury, this is simply just the best chest for this build, given the chance for earthquakes to deal double damage. I have a shit roll on that, but at the very least, I have it. And until I find the GA on the chance for earthquakes to do double damage, this will be good enough to carry me through the game. And again, I got a little bit unlucky with the sanctification. Sanctification pretty much didn't do anything to me except give me more Hammer of the Ancients levels. To touch on, there is another version of this build that you could find online, which does make use of Hammer of the Ancients, that is specifically used for bossing. Hammer of the Ancients is just very good for killing bosses. I no longer need to do that, so I don't. For our gloves, we have the Fists of Fate. Personally, I do not love these gloves. Really, the only thing you're using them for is the lucky hit chance to make enemies vulnerable. Again, my sanctification is pretty unlucky, uh, given that I don't use crowd control. I don't really have any big stuns or anything. Um, Personally speaking, I think you could replace these with gauntlets that have Grasping Whirlwind, which is the aspect that pulls enemies towards you. In Helltide and in many other content types, as long as you're tanky enough, pulling them towards you won't kill you. And I would argue that you could temper onto your gloves more earthquake size or such or earthquake damage, and get just as much benefit out of them. But these are BIS, so again, best in slot, not the best stats. And again, just personally speaking, I have incredibly bad luck with Fists of Fate. I've never once dropped a good one. Even with the lucky hit being very good on this, I still wouldn't consider this very good, personally speaking. For the pants, we have Ariat's Bearing. This is pretty bog standard now for most barbarian builds. I believe even the Mighty Throw build still uses this. Obviously, we have the GA on the Call of the Ancients cooldown. One of our big damage modifiers is this Call of the Ancients. You'll see in battle, this will easily be doing 300 to 400k damage per summons. My Sanctification ended up with +3 to basic skills. Again, pretty unlucky given we don't have any use of basic skills. I would love to replace these with a G8 version of the pants. Um, but because I already have such high cooldown on Call of the Ancients, I would specifically want to drop another pair that has the GA on Call of the Ancients. That's the one you care the most about. And obviously the ultimate damage is nice. For boots, we're using the aspect, the Ghostwalker's aspect on the boots. For most of your gear that isn't unique, you'll always want strength, life, and some combination of, you know, critical strike damage. Uh, Resistances can be good if you're getting killed quite a bit. As we can see on our boots, we actually got very, very lucky, I would say, on the boots because not only did we get plus strength, but we got a huge boost to our movement speed, being plus 33. And we had a GA on Earthquake size, which did in fact get sanctified, which is now why we have basically plus 50% Earthquake size. That's excellent. For for the temper, this was the Earthquake size was our temper, so obviously it was nice to get that boosted. On your two-handed mace, you'll usually use the Earthquakes aspect. You'll have to farm the overworld for this. You can ignore the top half, which is the ground stomp stuff, unless you specifically want to do the pit version where you use ground stomp. The important part for our build is the Earthquakes dealing 120% increased damage. Slotted into the mace, we have the Bach Tech. We're invoking Earthquake basically by moving around, and we constantly move because we're going to spin around the map with Whirlwind. On the weapons, again, very good to have strength. I would say reasonably good to very good to have life on hit. I personally like to have Fury on kill, but you can get other stats. Uh, a good one being like critical strike chance, overpower chance, even lucky hit to cause overpower. But you'd usually want to end at least with strength, life, flat life, and critical strike damage. So I was happy to get the GAs on my strength and critical strike damage. Tempered onto the mace, we have the chance for Earthquakes to cast twice. Again, important to cast as many Earthquakes as possible. Ideally, that percent would have been higher. I should have re-rolled it more before I upgraded and sanctified it, but I was tired of hunting for maces, so I took what I could get. In our two one-handed slots, we have the Ramelandi's Magnum Opus. This is purely used for the skills deal X increased damage per point of fury we have. Again, a bit of a bad roll on the 0.32, but I justified it based on the plus 48 maximum resource we ended up getting. Obviously, the plus to critical strike damage and overpower damage is huge. We sanctified with item quality, so we're even getting more DPS and more plus damage out of it. In the other one hand, we have the aspect for executioners. Again, strength very important. Life can be important. Life on hit, I would say, good enough. Keeps you somewhat a little bit more alive, but will not stop you from getting one hit. Critical strike damage, and then we got sanctified for another 5.8% max life. We can see right now I'm at about 6,500. Um, and we tempered on the plus to wallop. So when we go over the skills, I'll touch on wallop. For executioners, we can see that the overpowers your overpowers will spawn earthquakes every 4 seconds, and they deal 4,200 damage. And my earthquake damage is increased by 5% for every 100 strength that I have. You want to cap this out, obviously, and have 100% of that bonus. On our necklace right now, we have the aspect for anger management. On the necklace, we have the stats for strength, fury on kill, attack speed, heavy handed. We sanctified on the item quality, and we luckily got a GA for earthquake size. Again, earthquake size important. Um, in a perfect world, this necklace would have heavy-handed plus another passive, wallop, or one of the other ones. We didn't end up getting that. It'll be very hard to get that type of drop without buying it. And again, we got a little bit unlucky with sanctification, where we ended up getting quality. In terms of the aspect for anger management, you can see it says while above 50 fury, you deal increased damage and gain berserking. You're pretty much always going to be berserking in this build, either by virtue of having basically a 10-second cooldown on Call of the Ancients to give it to you, or by virtue of giving it to yourself through one of the war cries, or by auto attacking or hand attacking through lunging strike. You can see lunging strike gives you berserking for 3 seconds. So if it's ever down, you simply just click on an enemy. For one of our rings, we have the bold chieftains. Again, straightforward stuff. We want strength, we want life, we want critical strike chance or damage. We got some lightning resist on top of that through the masterworking. Not the greatest, but you can't really complain. Plus 121 to all stats when sanctified is pretty crap, but again, it's hard to find the perfect rings. So until I find a better one, I will simply just run this. It'll be good enough for most overworld T4 content. And for the aspect, you can see the shout. It just reduces the cooldown whenever I cast a shout skill per nearby enemy. And generally, there's going to be a ton of enemies on top of us in T4. We also dropped the Ring of the Starless Skies in one of the previous videos. Straightforward. We would have loved to have the GA on the critical strike chance instead of the attack speed, but the attack speed does work. It's a bit hard to explain, but the whirlwind does take into account your attack speed. +3 to core skills, obviously very nice. And this ring, I wouldn't call it mandatory for this build, but getting this makes it basically impossible for you to lose Fury in any content where enemies spawn on top of you, and especially in Hell Tides and in the pit. You will basically have full Fury forever, because you're constantly recouping it. For our last weapon, or for our polearm, or our other two-hand, we chose a polearm. You can do a sword. The bleed build is not as good this season. Takes a bit more time to come online, but you could use a sword with bleed. Um, for our aspect, we did the incendiary fissures. Again, just like the other weapon, we have strength, we have the max life, we have critical strike damage. The resource cost reduction is not perfect. Ideally, that would have been something else, but we will take it. Um, reduce the cost of Fury a little bit, and we tempered on the wallop. I think I skipped this, but for this, we tempered on earthquake size. The ring, we tempered on uh, something else that I can't see for some reason. Maybe I didn't temper it, maybe I forgot, or maybe it just got GA'd. Uh, but back to the mace. Obviously, plus to wallop is amazing. And then for the aspect, my earthquakes, again, multiplicative damage. They deal another 100% damage. Damage is converted to fire. The sanctification, again, is pretty crap. We actually have two of the same sanctification in this crowd control one on two different items, which is really, really, really unlucky. If and when I replace these Fists of Fate, I would love to get something that's not this. And slotted into our slicing weapon here is the Igni Gar. This is basically just to give us more critical strike chance. Slotted into my armor, these will one day be royal rubies. That's just for strength. And obviously, this will be royal diamonds for all resist. And your two hands would have royal emeralds for the critical strike damage. For the expertise, you're using two-handed expertise. This is straightforward. When you're using any weapon, you deal 10% increase to vulnerable damage and 10% increased critical strike against vulnerable. You're going to be making everything vulnerable all the time. To touch on the skill tree very quickly, we won't go over this too much. Obviously, I took the lunging strike, the whirlwind, more maximum fury, all the normal stuff for shouts, such as strategic rallying cry, enhanced challenging shout, the war cry, the modifiers to give your cries more duration and health back, damage reduction while berserking, important, more damage to enemies, uh, more life per fortify. While fortified, gain damage reduction. Obviously, we have the Call of the Ancients all the way to the top, where we gain Fury. And then for our key passive, we took Unconstrained, where Berserking's damage bonus is increased to 60%. And while you're not healthy, you're always Berserk. meaning, uh, again, you can lose life pretty quickly, even with the life on hit. You're almost always going to be preserved. For your mercenaries, we have hired Varanya, and for her skills, we've just gone down the tree on the right-hand side here, ending with Taste of Flesh, which will heal us. She's just going to be basically a whirlwind for us. And we took the Aldkin reinforcement, where enemies are slowed and they deal reduced damage, and we've binded that to the whirlwind. Very quick overview of divine gifts. Uh, I'll pause here for a second. I don't feel the need to explain these, but basically you just want to get them sanctified. They modify your drops in certain areas. Obviously, I'm still working on some of these because some of these are annoying to do, such as the world boss encounters one. Um, There is a farming method for this, whereby you can go into normal mode and sit on top of Asmodan, hit him once, and just continue to do that. Uh, he will always give you, one progress for that. Otherwise, you have to play the content as you normally would. Um, for the Paragon board, I don't want to spend too much time going over every node, but in general, first first board, very simple. We took the glyph socket to Marshall for casting shouts, gives us cooldown. Um, we took the Blood Rage board as our second board. We put the glyph for Rumble in that board, where we deal 3% increased damage to bosses. Uh, first, every 5 strength gives us 35% multiplicative damage on earthquakes, and we deal 3% increased damage to bosses and crowd controlled enemies for each earthquake up to 15%. I believe this was our third board. We came over to Force of Nature, where our earthquakes again deal 45% increased damage, and they have a chance to spawn a Dust Devil. Obviously, we took the legendary nodes for the earthquake duration and Dust Devil size. I plan to finish off the willpower to get the bonus requirement to get even more duration. For the socket, we took Challenger. This is just damage to elites. Very good. Our other board here on top is the Flawless Technique. This is technically our fifth board. Fourth board over here being the Carnage board, Berserking, granting attack speed and increased fire and physical damage. Socketed with Might. Might giving us bonus damage while wielding two-handed weapons, which we always do. And you can see there are rare nodes here for increased damage while berserking and multiplicative to critical strike chance. Again, once I have more points, I'll simply put the points to get the willpower in order to get the bonuses on these boards. Again, when you're doing these levelings, you need to be pretty efficient. Try to make sure to get your legendary nodes as fast as possible, along with your glyph slots, and focus on the rest later. For our last board here, which was again Flawless Technique, which says consecutive attacking with the same weapons increases critical strike chance and damage. And then we put the exploit glyph in, which is just when something hits us, they become vulnerable, which is how we're making everything vulnerable because everything's always going to be hitting us. All right, with the minutia of the build out of the way, I will quickly run a dungeon just so we can see a little bit of the how the build works. Very, very straightforward. I don't think it would be too hard to understand how the build works, but I will show a very quick run through. For people who are not already, make sure you craft your sigils and look for the mythic goblin sigil. You'll notice a purple modifier on your nightmare sigil. That will drop you 5 guaranteed mythics. I'm not going to hunt for it too much right now. I just want to find a good sigil dungeon. Um, for farming Obdicite, you generally want to look for Horadric storerooms or for other like reserve style keys. The gem reserves can also be good. I would recommend if you see like specific ones, some might say like diamond reserve or such, that you run them. They give you a huge amount of crafting material for your diamonds or for your sapphires or for whatever you need. which is very nice because farming uh, the gems can be pretty annoying. So as we can see, I'm just going to whirlwind through the map. I suck at clicking, so I'm going to, of course, misclick on the boxes. And I'm basically just making sure to move forward. You can see my rage is running out. It's really more so because I have not used my ultimate yet, so we'll pop that right quick. And I'm just going to spin through the board. Again, this is a nightmare dungeon, so I'm not too concerned about really missing all that much, especially in terms of gear. There are not that many upgrades that I need, as we talked about. So once you're at a state like this in your build where you don't need many upgrades, it's obviously much, much faster just to run through a dungeon and not bother. And at the end, if there was something good, you'll just see it in your leftover cache uh, treasure chest when you go back to whichever area you were in, when you part back to town or what have you. Important note in this build, as they come off cooldown, just be sure to use your shouts. If you're not seeing enemies, you can just stop spinning. It really doesn't matter. You're gonna get your fury back so fast that you'll never be out of fury. In terms of shrines to look out for, the very best shrine for this class, at, in some ways, is the artillery shrine. As you can see, I literally just kill everything on the screen without touching it. The downside to artillery shrine is that things die so fast that they kind of really can't hit you, and you kind of want things at least to do a little bit of damage to you so that you can trigger that vulnerable. Again, we're kind of at the point where we're never going to die in these nightmare dungeons. We're not really at any risk of dying unless we do something very stupid, or we misplay, or we get like mega stunned. And again, I'm basically just spinning through the whole dungeon. I mean, as I've shown, once you get to a certain point in terms of resource, your shouts are basically always off cooldown. Your ultimate is pretty much always off cooldown. It's like a 17-second cooldown right now. And anytime that you need more fury, you can just shout, because your shouts will be almost guaranteed to be off cooldown too. Reason I like this build, number one, I would class this build as pretty beginner friendly. You don't really need to know much in order to understand like what to do with the build. All you have to do is spin. Obviously, barbarians are consistently good. They can get quite tough. As you can see, my toughness is well into 100,000, even on T4. Obviously, it could be higher. My resistances could be higher and such, but I'm not really at any risk of dying to things except for perhaps um, mainline super bosses such as Duriel. Some of those you need to care a little bit about the mechanics. They can, in fact, one-shot you. I think that's pretty clear from the video in T3 where I died like an idiot to both Duriel and Andariel and Belial. But as long as you're being careful and playing carefully, you really shouldn't have that many issues. And obviously, for mainline overworld content, nothing's really going to be a threat to you. You can literally just go into any area like the Hell Tides and just spin your way through it, not needing to pay very much attention, not needing to do really all that much. Just let make sure you have a minion on to pick up your stuff, pick up your orbs or what have you. For the seasonal content, just make sure you're picking up the uh, the correct enemies. Make sure you're checking your season tab and doing the missions. And it's up to user preference when you do the capstone dungeons. I left them for quite a long time. I didn't feel any need to accelerate through them. I was still in a stage where I was using ancestral gear, so getting upgrades to ancestrals felt pretty good. The one quote unquote negative with this build is that I would class the ancestral build as a little bit low tier. It can be incredibly hard to find the correct aspects for the ancestral gear. You definitely will need bold chieftains. There's another aspect called vocalize, which gives you a modifier to your shouts. And you definitely need defensive uh, aspects on your gear, more so just to stay alive to spin. in the early game. My only other complaint with this build is that it is, I would call early game, um, early game weak, but late game strong. Being that when you're level 5, unless this is your twink character, you're really not going to have much of anything to give this character. And it can take time to get to the point where you can whirlwind through the map. Again, just like you might expect with early sorcerer play, the lack of good resource aspects, the lack of good access to resource management, a lack of access to really good Paragon boards, depending, can really hurt you. But I think it is worth it. Again, this is kind of one of those classes that you can more or less like AFK with. Um, you don't need to worry a whole heck of a lot for most anything. In terms of pit content, there is a pit push build. I would recommend just to look it up. I don't really feel the biggest need to walk through what the pit push does. Um, I would say just focus on getting your ground stomp on your action bar and ground stomping your way through the pit. In terms of the glyphs, I never really follow guides for glyph leveling. I kind of take what I like. But there are some efficiencies to be gained in terms of what you use and where, how you level. Of course, I would always suggest if you're moving into the higher torments that you level your glyphs and that you just pre-level them. Um, it is a little bit of suffering to have to run the pit a million times to get your glyphs to a nice level. But you will thank yourself for doing so when you're overpowered for the next torment that you are in. Um, for me, I prefer to be a little bit overpowered as opposed to a little bit underpowered. I would rather be able to walk into content and just do whatever I want rather than try to come up with a plan in order to survive content, quote unquote. So again, you can see I do still die despite all the toughness. Again, there will be times that you just die mechanically. Um, just be safe. Doesn't really matter that I'm dying. It's not a hardcore character. The best bosses to run, obviously, are ones with larger arenas where you can just spin on them, travel a distance. Obviously, make sure to stay on top of your health potions. Make sure to auto attack every now and again to proc that vulnerable. Make sure to use your dodge dash. I am right now not dodge dashing for some reason. I got hit again on the side, but that is more or less why I chose the class. Of course, as you might expect, the paladin itself is still quite overpowered, at least right now. The paladins do have a build very much like this with the Oridin and the Zeal builds. Those builds basically, solo farm the entire game. So if you're playing paladin, I guess have fun with it. In terms of potions, we can see I use the resource potion as well as Redmane Buzz. You can use the overpower potion as well. You can use the critical strike potion. As long as you use the main uh, the stat increase potions, you should be fine for in terms of potion viability. Again, we can see I'm doing all right with this boss. Some of these torment bosses are very annoying mechanically. Um, this is really my one complaint about T4 right now is that many of the bosses have mechanics that you just can't really avoid, and you just have to suffer through them. Not really the biggest deal, but it can be a little bit annoying to have to manage a mechanic. And again, I have died because I got pushed into the whirlwind. I don't necessarily think of dying on these world bosses as any great indicator of how OP your build is. I mean, it would be nice to have the capability to just stand there and not die. But with better ancestral gear, some better sanctifications, I would say this build should pretty much laugh through most content. Um, there's oh my gosh, dying again. There's very there's variations of this build as well that focus on always having earthquakes up and triggering earthquakes. Again, I would just recommend looking that up on a site like Maxroll or Mobalytics or such. I prefer using the whirlwind build. I like the idea of just spinning around the map. Generic advice in terms of leveling, just as I try to beat this world boss. Um, Usually it's most effective just to do seasonal content, to run Hell Tides, to do Nightmare Dungeons, to get into Torment as fast as you can in order to get the access to greater gains. Um, and obviously, the more you can focus on building up your Obdicite ahead of T4, the better. Masterworking your gear is obviously a big deal. It's always going to be a big deal in this game. Um, I wouldn't worry so much about if you get bad masterwork affixes. It can be easy-ish to find replacement gear, especially for ancestrals. My advice for the ancestral build is just think of yourself as being probably twice as weak as you think you ought to be. The ancestral build, again, this is like one of my main complaints. The ancestral build is very, very reliant on you having those ring aspects, on having, a really good weapon, and more specifically, two very good weapons. And with you kind of managing your resources. The other big thing is that in terms of master working, as it relates to the ancestral build, and even this build to a degree, you really do want large earthquake size, and you really do want chance for earthquakes to happen twice or what have you. And you want these to be as high as possible. And our reward for all that effort was a GA on the wrong one. But we can see we do have a plus on all the damage, so I'm strongly considering taking these pants. Regardless, that's the overview of the Whirlwind Earthquake Barbarian class. I hope you found this information informative. For any questions, leave them in the comments. And for now, I will pop back to my other uh, games. To note, I am doing PoE 2 as well. Please check out the Lunar Assault Werewolf build. I am loving Werewolf. I'm loving the Druid build. And specifically, I'm loving Lunar Assault because it's just really freaking OP. Thanks for listening in and watching.